Being an air traffic controller was my dream job. I knew it at 14 years old. I worked my ass off for it. I achieved it. And eventually, I walked away from it. That sentence alone probably sounds crazy to some people. Because air traffic control is one of those jobs people talk about like it's the finish line. It's good pay, it's good benefits, job security, prestige, responsibility. Why would anyone leave that? Let me tell you the whole story because it's not as simple as burnout or I hated it. I loved the job, and I still don't regret it. I knew I wanted to be an air traffic controller when I was 14 years old, career day at school. One of the presenters, a friend of mine's dad, was an air traffic controller. And he started talking about the job, and something in my brain just clicked. Now, I grew up in aviation. My dad was a flight dispatcher for Delta Airlines for over 30 years. My grandparents owned a company, designed and manufactured safety equipment for airplanes, so aviation was always around me. Ironically, and I do know how ridiculous it is, I hate flying. I love aviation from the ground. Feel free to laugh, most people do. But ATC felt like my niche. It was aviation without being in the airplane. It was structured, it was high stakes, mental game, and it felt important. I used to describe it as a giant video game, just one where you're not allowed to lose. Another buddy's dad took me on my first tour of Atlanta TRACON in Peachtree City, Georgia, one of the busiest facilities in the world. And that sealed it. I walked out of that facility knowing this is it. I originally wanted to be a dispatcher like my dad. I loved his job. It was really cool. But he encouraged me to go the government route instead of airlines. He would talk about the airline volatility, which is honestly hilarious in hindsight because I spent years in government shutdowns working without getting paid. So much for stability. So how did I actually achieve it? I went to Middle Georgia College of Aviation, which I believe is now the University of Middle Georgia. I studied air traffic management and I earned my bachelor's degree. I thrived in aviation studies. I graduated with a 4.0 GPA. Then came the ATSAT test, the Air Traffic Selection and Training Test. It's the kind of final exam that every controller had to take. I scored a 100 on it. At that point, I knew this career was for me. The hardest part wasn't intelligence. Wasn't aptitude. It was the pressure you put on yourself, especially as a trainee. In training, there were times where you have a single simulator session where you either pass and continue or you fail and find a new career. That's not an exaggeration. That's a lot of pressure for a 19, 20-year-old kid. There were moments where I wondered if my anxiety could be controlled enough to do the job. Not anxiety about the job, just general anxiety. I was an anxious kid. I never wondered, was I good enough? I knew I was. But could I manage the stress? Could I manage myself? I busted my ass studying for years. I got hired 6 months after graduating, which was insanely fast at the time. Most people waited several years to hear something back. I was the first and only person from my graduating class to be picked up in that selection cycle. That was fall of 2010. After background checks and psych evals and physicals, the whole government hiring circus, I started my career pretty much exactly 1 year after graduation. I got sent off to Oklahoma City, where our headquarters was, for 7 weeks of academy training. And then off to my first facility, Pensacola Air Traffic Control Tower. I think I was 22 years old. It was a whirlwind, and I loved every minute of it. Once I got there, I certified on all positions in minimum time. And I had a newborn baby. For a while, I felt like everything I had worked for had finally paid off. So what was the job really like? People love to say air traffic control is the most stressful job in the world. Don't get me wrong, it can be stressful. But I can think of a lot of other jobs that would be way worse. The best way I've ever heard ATC described was one of my instructors in college. He would say that it's 8 hours of mostly boredom and 30 seconds of sheer terror, which is very accurate. If you're good at the job, it should be kind of boring. Still fun, but boring. Then sometimes something crazy will happen. Sometimes it might be your fault. Most of the time it's just happenstance, but it'll rattle you to your bones. And yes, every controller has had the dream, the nightmare about something happening or almost happening. We've all been there. Now the shifts absolutely sucked. A typical week, if not including overtime, start on a late shift, so 3 to 11, then your next shift's 1 to 9, then 9 to 5, then maybe 7 to 3, and then you end with a 5 to 1. So you're starting and ending earlier every day. Your sleep is just destroyed constantly. But honestly, the environment was great. The people were awesome. Everyone got along. We became very close friends. Morale was pretty good for most of my career, except during government shutdowns. Those sucked. Being used as a political pawn while still being required to show up to work without pay and thousands of people's lives depend on you, that gets old. But you miss holidays, you miss important events, you get used to that too. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter. It's just part of what comes with the job. But the cost, the part that people don't see is over time, it wore me down as a husband and a father. Now, to be fair, I can't blame air traffic control for everything or even most of it. At home, I had 2 small boys and a terminally ill wife, and I was the primary caregiver. Now, that's a heavy load no matter what kind of job you have. But ATC didn't leave much emotional fuel in my tank. Eventually, I felt trapped by what I later found out people would call the golden handcuffs. You have good pay, good benefits, great benefits, stability. And the thought of walking away from that feels irresponsible, even when you're drowning. So let's fast forward a few years. My first wife, Nikki, passed away in 2019 after battling her illness for around 10 years. I was able to transfer up to a facility in Georgia, where I'm from, to be closer to my family so they could help with my boys. Later on, I reconnected with my high school best friend, Ashley. She had just gone through a divorce. I was recently widowed. She lived up in North Carolina. I lived down in Georgia, south of Atlanta. The world was thrown into a loop with COVID-19. So what did we do? We decided to start a long-distance relationship with 4 kids between us in the middle of a global pandemic. And it was the greatest decision we ever made. We eventually got married. I was able to get another transfer up to Greensboro, North Carolina, and we started our life here. Leaving wasn't sudden. It was gradual. Ashley and I started Always Forward Roofing in 2021. That's her background. She's a general contractor and had been doing roofing sales for years, so I finally convinced her to do it the right way and do it herself. And we'd have conversations pretty early on after we started the business that, at what point would I walk away from the FAA? If my job at the FAA gets in the way of AFR growing, then it's kind of a easy decision. But it's never easy. We thought about it a lot. We talked about it for, I think, a year and a half. We agreed if the money made sense, I'd leave. And I won't sugarcoat it. Losing that guaranteed paycheck scared the hell out of me. It was the strangest mix of emotions. Why am I walking away from my lifelong dream? But at the same time, it was a relief that I wouldn't have to deal with the negatives anymore. But AFR was growing. We had a newborn baby together. She needed some extra help with the business. Thanks to Ashley and taking that gamble, I walked away from the FAA. And it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. So, life after ATC. What surprised me the most since then? I've been asked that a few times from family and friends and old coworkers, what it's like afterwards, making such a massive life change when you thought you had the rest of your, professional life planned out. Probably the most surprising thing is I became a creative. I never, ever considered myself creative. I never played music. I was never good at art. I couldn't even draw an acceptable stick figure. But while I was working to help grow AFR with my wife, I would handle our marketing, which included taking pictures, doing some drone work, some videos, and a little bit of content creation. And that sparked an interest. It later turned into real estate photography, which I learned on the side, self-taught through YouTube, of course. I started that just as a little side business for some realtor friends that we had, which eventually led to me being recruited by the CoStar Group, which is homes.com, apartments.com, all of that. So I started a new career as a full-time photographer and videographer. We weren't just real estate photographers. We covered lifestyle events, sporting events, restaurants, everything. We learned extremely fast and we had a ridiculous workload. It was a lot of fun, but it became unmanageable as I started pushing 50 to 60 hours of work every week. And that was just trying to keep up with the metrics that we had. It was unsustainable for everyone involved. But AFR was still growing, and Ashley asked me to come back and help. Not that I left because I'm still a co-owner of the company, but AFR is her baby. I'm not the roofer. She's the roofer and general contractor. I just helped with some of the boring business stuff and a little project management. But we agreed that the ridiculous hours my job was having us work was getting in the way of our business, and not to mention we still have 5 kids. So I walked away from my second 6-figure career in a matter of 3 years. And I know I'm nuts, but it was the right call again for my own sanity. I was able to focus on my photography. I was able to attend more events and sports. At my older kid's school, he was going to Oak Ridge Military Academy. I ended up building a friendship with the admissions director, and we started discussing ways for me to help out with some marketing because they didn't have any dedicated marketing. That conversation led to them hiring me as the full-time marketing director. Now I get to make content professionally at a school that 3 of my kids now attend. Even though I never saw myself as a creative, now it's literally all I do: photography, videography, marketing. I've worked with multiple companies, obviously with Orma, content creation. I'm a better father now. I'm a better husband. I'm way more present. I'm more fulfilled. And I don't regret being an air traffic controller, not for a second. I still encourage kids all the time to consider it. It's an incredible career if it fits your life. So what's the forward focus message in all this? I hope someone hears this and realizes you're not stuck. You're not trapped. You're not failing just because the path you chose doesn't look the way you thought it would by now. If you like your path, stay on it. Seriously, don't let anyone talk you out of something that feels right just because it's hard. But if you want change, change. Not recklessly, not emotionally. Do it with a good head on your shoulders and your mind forward. Leaving isn't quitting. It's not giving up. It's not weakness. Sometimes it's just realizing that the runway you're on isn't the one you were meant to take off from anymore. And hey, that doesn't mean you taxi straight ahead into the grass either. Have a plan. Check your instruments. Maybe don't shut the engines off at 30,000 feet. All right, that's quite enough of the aviation puns. Leaving wasn't quitting. It was choosing the next runway. Sorry, last one. Just use a combination of logic and following your heart. Learn to be flexible and know that you can always take steps to change what you want changed in your life. Just keep moving forward.